This is the end of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And he finishes with a metaphor or a parable that we have heard many times. In fact, if you grew up in the church, you probably sang a little song about it, about a little wise man building a house on the rock. And the rains came down and the floods came up. You remember that song? Or maybe it's just the old ones of us. I don't know if it's still around, but it was a song that taught us you're supposed to listen to the words of Jesus and be a wise man, and then your house will survive. And so this morning, as we finish the Sermon on the Mount and conclude this series, which I believe this is our 10th sermon, and I had to skip over some stuff in chapter 7, so if you're a good student and you want to go back and look at that, I'll let you do that to kind of complete the whole thing. But as we wrapped up, I wanted to finish with this parable because there's so much in this little metaphor that I'm not sure we have fully comprehended what Jesus is saying and how he's bringing all of his teaching together. And that's what I hope to leave you with today, because Jesus' teaching will change your life. It will make a difference. It will help you in ways that you don't even understand, and you think you've been following it, but I want to suggest to you there is so much more. You can go so much deeper. You can be so much stronger than you are even now if you will listen to these words and let God speak to you. So in Matthew 7, verse 24, we will pick it up there. Jesus concludes. He says, therefore, this is always a word of conclusion. If you see therefore in English, it's usually the Greek word kai. Kai means in conclusion. Therefore, because of everything I've taught you, he says, in conclusion, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, he is like a wise man who builds his house on the what? Rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall. Why? Because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone, verse 26, who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the what? Sand. The sand, the loose dirt. The rain came down, the floods came up, streams rose up. The winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. And I remember in Sabbath school, we used to slap our hands. The house fell flat. Bam. Verse 28, when Jesus had finished saying all these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. I've said it many times, and I want to remind you one more time. Jesus is the greatest spiritual teacher this world has ever heard. You can put him against anybody. You can put him against Buddha, Muhammad, any of the great teachers of the past, any of the great teachers of the present, any great self-help person that's out there today. You can put him against the most popular pastors that are having mega churches, but you will not find more profound, simple, and life-changing teaching than what Jesus taught. And so he says, if you hear, verse 24, these words of mine, and you put them into practice, you follow them, you're like a wise man who builds on the rock. And if you don't, you're like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. Now, I don't know how many of you are parents, but if you are, you have probably taken your family to the beach. And you have gone with your kids, and inevitably, In fact, I don't know if it's something innate in human nature, but children like to build things out of sand. They like to dig in the sand. They love it if you can get them those molds and they can make these little castles, and maybe they'll make a huge sand castle there or put a big hole next to it or dig a moat that goes around it. And I remember one of the first times taking my two daughters over to Outer Banks, and we were enjoying the beauty there, and they're digging in the sand, and they make this amazing, elaborate sand castle, and they're just playing together happily for like 2 hours, which, as a parent is like, wow, the beach is the best vacation ever. Like, I haven't heard a word out of them. They're just sitting there enjoying the sun and the sand, and they're creating, and they're actually getting along, and they're helping each other, and there's just the occasional dispute over who's going to go to the water and get take the bucket to the water and fill it up and bring it back. And other than that, it's just relaxing. Except that there's one problem with the sand castle. When you start building it, it becomes this beautiful project, and time can go by, and it may take you an hour or 2 or even 3 to build this elaborate castle, at which point the ocean could be at a different place than it was when you started. Now, we as adults know this, but children don't realize what's coming. And so they build this elaborate castle, not noticing that the tide is coming closer and closer. And it could be that after an hour or 2, suddenly they notice that waves are coming right up to the edge of this priceless piece of art that they have spent hours creating. And now there is a bit of consternation, because all it takes is that one first wave, right? That one wave that goes a little further than the others, and then you hear the screams, "Oh no!" And you see the water rush up and hit the side of the castle, and then half the castle is gone, just smoothed right back out into the sand like it never existed. And then there's some futile attempts, to dig a trench, and wait, we got to protect it from the ocean. But as you know, the waves keep coming further and further until the castle is washed away, returned to the sand from which it was created. Now, as adults, we know this is going to happen, and if you don't want it to happen, you're going to have to build quite a bit of further away from where the tide's going to be, etc. But I think it does fit for the life that is built upon something other than the truth. I would suggest to you that we have many people in our world today that are living by teachings and priorities and values that are not solid, that are tossed to and fro, that the minute the waves of life and trials and pain and challenge comes, their castle crumbles like a castle of sand. Maybe that's been an experience for you. I remember when I was separated and going through this tough time and processing with a divorce and living by myself and realizing how challenging this whole thing was, and emotionally and mentally and spiritually. And I had a day where it felt like life just wasn't worth it. I felt like the waves had come and taken everything that was important to me. And I had nothing left. All my life's work washed away in an instant. And I was just like, God, why? How did this happen? Why are we going through this? What am I going to do? I don't have time to rebuild everything. That took so much work, and it's just gone. And we can come to these moments in our life, these valleys, where the waves and storms just wash everything away, and we feel like we got nothing left. And I remember God saying to me, and you have to understand before I tell you what he said to me, you have to understand that God and I have a unique relationship. And one of the things he does for me is he has a bit of humor. And he often uses it. And it helps me because I appreciate it. Even sometimes he's a little sarcastic with me, which I can be sarcastic, so it's only fair. I recognize it. And I'm there at my lowest point, trying to figure out where I can build, how I can get my foundation back, how I can restore all these things that I've lost. And God says to me, if only you knew a little something about spirituality and faith, maybe you could make it through this time. If only you had read a few books. If only you had studied the Bible a little bit, maybe, Pastor, you could make it through this. This is my imagination, as you can see, a little bit. But God essentially said to me that day, Rick, what is your faith for if it's not for this moment? What has been the point of all those prayers, of all that time in the Bible? What has been the point of all those sermons, all those books you've read, all those podcasts you've listened to, everything you've studied to try to teach others how life works? What is the point of all that if it isn't for this moment right now? That's a good point. I had to think about that. And I had to stop complaining, and I said, wait a minute, surely there's something in my toolbox here that can help me. Surely I've read something, there's some scripture I've memorized that can help me here. Surely all that I have studied and read can do something for me right now. Because if it can't, then what was the point? And it's funny because that was like an aha moment for me. It was like a totally new thought. And I had to laugh at myself because I realized there's something when we go through hard times, when life knocks us down, when the waves come in and wash away what we built, there's something in us that we just want to complain and throw ourselves on the thorns of life and can't believe this is happening. Oh, really? You can't believe that there's storms, waves, trials, challenges? You never thought that that would ever happen to you? And that is, I think, exactly the problem with us as humans, is for some crazy reason, we think all these terrible things that we see happen to everyone else, all the terrible things on the news, all the trials and challenges, and the people that we're praying for, oh, God bless them, they're going through this or they're going through that, I'm so sorry, so-and-so at church, they're wrestling with this. Somehow we think, that won't happen to me. And when it happens to us, we're so shocked. What happened? I never expected this. I didn't see this coming. I can't believe it. I can't believe, God, that I'm going through this. You got to help me. This is unreal. And somehow we feel like, how did this happen? What a shock. What a surprise. As if it would only happen to others and nothing would ever touch our lives. So I want to look deeper at Jesus' parable with this as the context. Because I think Jesus' sermon, and I think all of his teachings, don't miss this point. I want you to hear me. I think all of his teachings are to prepare you so that when the storm comes, you will still stand. All of everything he taught you is so that when sin and all the destruction and pain and agony and challenge and trial and suffering, and I can't think of any other adjectives, but I'm sure there's more, all those negative words, when those things happen, that your house will still stand. That you can survive. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you have to be like rejoicing and think it's the most awesome thing when something bad happens. But I do think if you're following the teaching of Jesus, what he wishes, what he is trying to tell you, is that if you actually put them into practice and you actually build upon them, that no matter what happens to you, you will get through. And of course, Jesus himself is the proof. Jesus went through more than any of us could imagine. I mean, I was really down and out in that story I told you. I was really bad off. But I want to tell you, I wasn't sweating drops of blood. I've never gotten to that level of agony. Jesus has been through more than you and I. And when we see him in the Garden of Gethsemane, when we see him crying out to God, please let this pass, when we see that he is carrying the weight of all the sin of this world, when we see it separating him from his Father, when we see drops of blood coming out of his pores because he's so desperate, he's so discouraged, he's so down, when we see him begging his disciples, would you please pray for me? This is beyond anything I can handle. Pray for me. And they fall asleep, and he finds them falling asleep, and he's all alone. And yet his house holds in the storm. I can tell you, if I had been Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, I would have been out. I've been like, Rick, out. Bye. You guys are on your own. This is too much. I am not going to bear all your crazy sins. You guys don't even want me to die for you. You don't even want salvation. My best friends who maybe would appreciate it, they're asleep, so forget it. I'm done. Out. Up. Easier. I don't have to do this. But Jesus walks into the storm and comes out the other side, resurrected, stronger, glorified. And I think his journey in a small way can be our journey too. That no matter what we go through, if we're anchored and live by the principles he taught us, that we can go right into the storm and come out even stronger with our house still intact. Now, I'm not really preaching of what I know. I'm preaching of what Jesus tells me, because I don't think I'm there yet. But I think I could be there if I will take his teachings seriously. And it says in verse 24, whoever hears these words, and the NIV actually captures it well, because it says in the NIV, whoever hears the words and puts them into practice. And that Greek word for hears really means comprehends. It means someone. And by the way, this is very biblical. In the Old Testament, whenever you hear the word hear, it's not talking about just hearing a sound. We would use the word hear like, oh, I heard a voice, or I heard a bird, or I heard... In the Old Testament, hearing means I heard you, and it shows because I did what you said. In fact, in the Old Testament especially, if you didn't do what God says, or you didn't do what the prophet says, they say you didn't hear him. Even though you might have actually heard him, you just didn't do it. But for them, hearing means obedience. And it's the same word here in Greek. It's saying this is someone who comprehends, who puts into practice, who does the things that Jesus taught. And now we've gone through a lot of the teachings of Jesus this year. And I want to encourage you to go back and review them, because I feel like until we start to practice the basic things that Jesus taught, until we get serious about trying to live them and make them our values, then nothing else in the Bible really matters until we get some of these things down. When you get to heaven, I don't think it's just your knowledge of the Bible that will save you. I think you have to actually start to incorporate these teachings. Because they all point to God, and they're all relational. And remember, we've said a million times, when Jesus teaches, he teaches to the heart. And this is another place where we'll see that. This wise man, in the Greek, the word for wise was really interesting. The root of this word for wise means diaphragm, your stomach, your inner gut. That's the root word for it. And it's the root because back in their days, you had a phrase or a concept that actually, it was kind of in your gut, in your stomach, where your heart was, and where you could most trust yourself. And we even say it today, trust your gut, right? I had a gut feeling about it. There's something inside of me that said, And so this is the concept here. He's saying a wise person is someone whose inner strength dictates their outer behavior. That's literally in this word. That's what this word means. It's someone who is letting their heart, this heart given to God, this heart that has gone with the teachings and values of Jesus, letting that heart dictate their outward behaviors. And in this case, the metaphor is they build a house on the rock. They say, this is the place to build. This is where I am staking my life. And I love that Jesus said he built a house. I think a house is an awesome metaphor for how we construct our lives. And that's why I've entitled my sermon, The Foundation is Everything. I think we live in a world that tries to build the walls, the windows, tries to make the house look glitzy and glamorous and beautiful. I think we live in a society that puts the emphasis on the outward look. I mean, how many, just to get real here, how many home improvement shows are there on TV right now? I haven't counted, but it seems like there's more and more every day. And if you watch them, and they're kind of fun to watch, right? They have a very important concept, and that is curb appeal. Oh, we're going to help your house. We're going to give it curb appeal. We got to give it some curb appeal. And what do they mean? They mean from the road, you want to look and see that the house is pretty, and you want to put a little bit of landscaping in front of it and fix the outside and do something with those shutters and clean off that and maybe redo the porch at the front or whatever it is. We want curb appeal. But we live in a society where curb appeal is more important than the foundation on which the house is built. And the problem with that is, as Jesus said, if you build your house for curb appeal, the storms can knock it down. And how much curb appeal do you have when your house is laying flat? No, that's a real curb appeal problem if your house falls down. And Jesus says, the first thing you need to do is get the foundation right. I think a lot of times when God is working in my life, and it hurts sometimes, and it's painful sometimes, I think what he's doing is he's trying to go in and dig down and kind of rebuild some of my foundation. Because if you think about it, where did you get your house? Did you build it from the ground up? I think most of us kind of get our house from our parents, right? From the family we grew up in. And that can be wonderful if you had a wonderful family that was really good at digging and building a secure house and a secure foundation and modeled to you what healthy, happy, spiritual relationships and friendships and values and principles. That can be great, but sometimes things kind of get put in our foundation that we know aren't so good. And they don't serve us well. And I think when that happens, our house is very prone to collapse. Or maybe one wall is really crooked and it's hard to get the doors to be straight so they work right when half your house is like 6 inches lower on one side. And if anybody here is a builder, you know how important it is to get that foundation perfectly level and to get it absolutely straight and strong. And you don't want it to sink over time. Some of us may have lived in a house where over time it's kind of sunk and If it's really bad, you could start getting cracks in your walls, and you know that the future, and I even know a house where a friend of mine, they had to come and jack up one corner of the house because it just was sinking into the soil because it was too wet or something going on. And so Jesus is saying, you got to get that foundation right. And if you want to get the foundation right, I have laid out for you the teachings on which you can build your house. Because the things you have built in that are from this world or from your family or even from your own sinful nature, your own priorities and values that you have put in your foundation, some of those are not serving you well. Some of us need a new foundation. Some of us need to put in some extra supports. Some of us need to change the whole premise on which we live our lives because we are about to collapse. And I wish I was only talking to a few of you, but I know this is our condition as sinful humans. And Jesus is the answer, and his teachings show us the way, and they are the strength that we desperately need. And when we build on those, then no storm can come against it. And I love that Jesus said 3 things. Did you notice that? He said, first, there's the rains that come down. The rains that come down. To me, I kind of thought of those moments of loss. There's something that can be kind of sad about rain at times. When it's dark out and it's supposed to be light and the rain is falling. And you know, what happens to you when you experience loss? Rain is like tears that fall down our face. And we're coming out of a time period here where many of us have experienced loss. And even if we didn't lose someone close to us, just this whole COVID pandemic experience has been such a drastic change. There's been just a huge amount of loss in our life, just a change of everything. So how is your house held up with the rains of this pandemic? How are you doing inside? Are your walls still strong? Is the roof still on? Or do you feel a bit shaky? And I'm not here to judge. Jesus isn't here to judge. He's just here to say, I can help you with that house. I can help you shore it up and strengthen it so that when the times of loss come, some of us have been through some pretty tough experiences where we've really lost in a very hard way in an unexpected tragedy. What do you do when those rains start beating on you? And then he says, after the rains come down, he says, the water, the floods, the streams come. Literally, the word he chose here is river. I grew up somewhat in Tennessee, and in Tennessee, David and Barbara, Kent, in Tennessee, we talked about the cricks. Cricks are a little different. And there's a lot of them in Tennessee because Tennessee is a hilly place. And I lived in eastern Tennessee, Greenville, Tennessee, for about 6 years. And we had a bunch of hills and a bunch of little valleys. And in every little valley, there was a creek. And it was this carved out thing where the water had just carved. And it wasn't much water usually in them, except when it rained. The minute it started raining, you no longer had a creek, you had a creek. And if it really rained, you had a river. And these little valleys, you would see water just rushing down them when you had a lot of rain. And they were a little bit dangerous, and everybody knew about the cricks. The cricks, when you went days without rain, were just small little trickles of water, and then when you had some rain, they were creeks, and then when you had a lot of rain, they were rivers. And that's just how Tennessee was. You just knew. And you could see the different levels in these little creek paths and how they carved it out. You could see where the water would get real high at times, and then other times it would be just kind of in the middle, and sometimes they would actually dry up if you hadn't had rain for a long time. It's just the way they were. And so Jesus was also in a desert climate, and so in a desert, again, rivers can come in an instant. When it starts pouring rain, all of a sudden, a vast amount of water. So he says, not only is rain hitting you from above, now rain is hitting you from the side, a current of water coming to wash your house away. Now, the only way a house is ever going to withstand a current of water is it has to have a really strong foundation. Because there's something about water, when you get a bunch of it moving, it's a powerful force. Have you ever been to a site where like a dam burst and seen the amount of destruction when you have hundreds of thousands of gallons of water? I remember seeing one in Colorado, this dam that burst back in the 30s or 40s, and it carried boulders that just seemed insurmountable. I don't know how many tons these boulders weighed, but the water just washed them down like they were nothing. It carried houses away. It carried trees away. Water is a powerful force, but Jesus said, if you're on the right foundation, not the water coming down and not the water coming at you can wash you away. And then last he mentioned the wind. And specifically the word he used was the wind beat upon the house. And the word here in Greek, it's this word for falling against, like throwing all your weight against something. The wind is giving everything it's got to knock this house down. I like this metaphor because there's some times in life where something hits you sideways and it feels like a mighty wind. And it could be just one sentence that someone says to you. And it's like this wind just trying to knock you over. And you think, wow, that took me back. I wasn't expecting that. And all of us have probably had some moment where we feel like some news hit us with full force and we didn't know how we were going to make it. We didn't know how we were going to deal with it. And we may even walked around in a daze for a couple of days just trying to process this new information. And Jesus says, build upon the rock and the wind won't blow you down. You'll be able to stand. Unfortunately, Jesus said there are some that don't build on the rock. And it's foolish because these same rains and rivers and winds will come. And he said in that case, when the winds come and the wind beat against it, the house on the sand collapsed. It fell, he says, with a great crash. It's the word mega, with a mega fall, a mega collapse. I wish I didn't know what he was talking about, but I can tell you there have been moments in my life where I have built on the sand, and I have had that mega collapse. And it is not a fun day. It is not a good feeling when everything falls apart and you're left there going, man, I really blew that. I should have known better. It's obvious now that I look back, but I got caught up. I got distracted. I built on the wrong priorities. And it's interesting because this word for falling or collapsing or the house coming down is the word for falling prostrate. Falling down before someone, coming down on your face before someone. And it's the same word that is used many times in the Gospels when someone comes and throws themselves before Christ. Once there was a lady who threw herself before Christ begging that Jesus would heal her daughter who was possessed by a demon. Another time it was Peter. Peter, when Jesus caught all those fish, and remember they've been fishing all night and they didn't catch anything, and then Jesus said, hey, just, put your net out over here. And they're like, yeah, right, like that's going to work. And then they had so much fish, and Peter is just amazed by the miraculous power of who this guy is. And it says he falls prostrate before Jesus. And he says, depart from me, for I am a sinner. And I'm pointing that out because I think Jesus, even in the collapse of the foolish man's house, is trying to give us an inkling of what the next step is. If you do find yourself in that place where everything collapses and you recognize I was building on the wrong foundation, the answer is fall at Jesus' feet. There's still hope. Yeah, your house collapsed, but it can be rebuilt. And this time we're going to rebuild it on the right foundation. And so the way that Jesus is leading, one of the things I think God is always doing with trials and challenges and suffering and all these things we may face in this life is he's always trying to bring us to that moment where we'll go, oh, I need you, God. That was the secret all along. That's what I should have known all along, is that I need you, God. Like what he's saying in this parable is the end result is that you fall on your face before Jesus. That's where these trials will lead you. And if you haven't built on my word, if you hadn't put into practice my teaching, at least come before me and collapse and fall before me, and then we can start over and we can build your house right. I know when I first heard this parable, I always thought, well, it's one person who's lost and one person who's saved. But I don't think Jesus is talking about being lost or saved. He's talking about houses that stand and houses that collapse. And what he's saying is, if your house collapses, there's still hope. You can rebuild, and you can rebuild on the right foundation. As long as you learn. Don't rebuild it back on the sand. Don't rebuild it the way it was. You can do something different. You can do it right this time. You can start over. And there's hope for you. And there's mercy for you. It's not like Jesus stands over there and goes, I told you so. You really built a lousy house, and I saw it all along. I knew this was going to happen. Bad luck for you. Should have bought the property with the rock. No, Jesus is saying, when the storms knock you down, fall at my feet. I will help you build the next one. We'll get it right the next time because his grace is so good and his love for us is so deep. He doesn't want to leave us that way. He doesn't laugh when we fail, when we ignore him. He doesn't take delight in us failing because, well, you didn't do it my way, so I guess that'll teach you a lesson. That's not who our God is. He wants you to be that wise man. And it's never too late. As long as you have time on this earth, as long as there is breath in your lungs, you can put into practice all these things that we've looked at over these last 10 sermons. And it becomes something that changes your heart. It changes your value. It rewires your neural circuits. God has this way of doing something that only God can do, and it starts to permeate everything that you are. Now, it will take some practice, and it will take some time. This doesn't happen overnight, but if you'll let him, your life can be very different. Your life can be so much stronger. You can be so much more powerful than you ever thought. So that when the winds come and the rain pours and the rivers try to sweep you away, you can stand. I want that in my life. I want to have that kind of strength. I don't have it yet, but I'm working on it. And I know that the secret to getting there is to learn and practice the teachings of Jesus. And daily, I want to be in his word. I want to write these things down. I want to practice them because they don't come natural. When someone hits me, I want to hit them back. When someone wants my pearls, sometimes I just want to give them and be done with it. There's a lot of practical teaching that Jesus has given us that if we will learn and do the hard work to apply them, we will get stronger. And the rains can come, and the wind can blow. And you know, a really strong house, sometimes it doesn't even notice if it's rainy or windy. I admire people like that. People like Daniel, Joseph, people in the Bible that went through extraordinary challenges and losses, but never were moved off their foundation. They never left that foundation. And guess what? These people changed the world because they were stronger than anything in the world. I want that in my life, don't you? I want that to be the whole point of why we have gone through these teachings of Jesus. That we can be stronger. That we can be unmovable. That we can be anchored to the right foundation. Jesus didn't tell you these things for nothing. He didn't tell you them to be clever. He didn't tell you them because they were cute little phrases or proverbs or teachings. He shared them because they're the truth, because they're work, because they are the values that should shape and guide your life. They should have input. They should inform every decision that you make. And He will help you with that. And so I'm asking you today, would you make a commitment as we sing our closing song and we have our final prayer? I'm asking for you to make a commitment, and I'm going to leave some time in our final prayer for you and God to talk, that you will take seriously the teachings of Jesus and ask Him to help you apply those teachings especially. And I think God will do this for each of us. He'll show you exactly which teaching to start with. We've gone over a lot of them, haven't we? And some of them are just one sentence. Some of them were told in little parables like this house one. Whatever it is that God puts on your heart, I want you and God to decide what's the first one you're going to work on. Pick one this afternoon and work on it this week. Maybe it's the one where He says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. So all this week, I'm going to just let my yes be yes. Just let my yes be yes. Put that in your mind. Practice it. When you start to embellish or exaggerate or kind of mislead people with your words, you go, no, hold on. Yes be yes. Just talk simply. Be honest. Be authentic. Be real. Okay, I'm going to practice that. I'm going to work on that. Even if I have to say something that might embarrass me or I have to admit that I failed in some way, I'm going to let my yes be yes. Maybe it's that you want to seek first the kingdom of God. Put that above all these other goals you have. See how that changes your week. Anyway, I could go on. Pick something and work on it. Start to change your foundation. I think it will make an incredible difference in your life. I think a lot of our pain and problems and challenges are because our foundation is a little bit shaky. And I want a strong foundation. I want to be secure when these winds and rains and winds blow and rivers come. And I think Jesus' teaching can bring us to that point. So we're going to sing together for our closing song here, and then I'm going to challenge you in the prayer. And you and God are going to decide. You can think about it as we sing. What teaching am I starting with? God, what teaching do you want me to start with? And how can this be the beginning of a whole new house for my life?